Premature menopause, came the words, striking Sarah Fuller deeply. Dr. Hampton delivered the diagnosis calmly, as though it were a routine conversation, not a crushing blow to Sarah's hopes. But I'm only 36, Sarah exclaimed, her voice thick with disbelief. How can this be possible? What can we do about it? What treatments are available? Sarah sat in a plush chair across from Dr. Hampton's desk, her husband Keith beside her, holding her hand as the doctor continued to explain. Sarah, Dr. Hampton said softly, there's no way to reverse menopause once it starts. We can offer hormone replacement therapy to help manage symptoms like hot flashes, night sweats, and other discomforts. HRT is also important to reduce your risks of osteoporosis and heart disease, but we can't stop the process. Sarah struggled to hold back tears. Are you sure? She asked, her voice laced with a small glimmer of hope. Could it be something else? The doctor shook his head. You haven't had a period in 4 months, and you've only had a few over the past year. Your blood work confirms significantly reduced estrogen levels. This is a clear case. Sarah glanced at her husband, his expression difficult to read, before turning back to the doctor. Does this mean I can't have a baby? She asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Hampton frowned gently. Technically, as long as you're still having periods, there's a slight chance. However, after trying for nearly 2 years with no success, and considering that your husband's fertility is fine, the likelihood is very low without assistance. Fertility treatments could be an option, but with unpredictable ovulation, the odds are against you. Sarah swallowed hard, fighting to steady her voice. Thank you, Dr. Hampton, she said, though it was clear how much the news had shaken her. Sarah and Keith had been married for 11 years. She was an athletic brunette with striking green eyes and a playful smile. Keith, taller by 3 inches, had a surfer's build, blonde hair, and blue eyes. They had met in college, both on scholarships, and while they quickly fell in love, they decided to wait until after graduation to marry. It seemed the responsible thing to do. Keith's family was well off, while Sarah's upbringing had been less fortunate. She had witnessed the struggles of her mother, her aunt, and her older sister, all of whom had endured difficult lives. Every one of them had gotten married young. Every one of them had set their life plans on hold to have children. Every one of them had done a lot of living hand to mouth and had never made much of themselves beyond being mothers. As a result, Sarah was bound and determined to make it in the world before she would even consider children. It wasn't that she didn't want to be a mom, far from it, as she loved kids and absolutely wanted her own, but she wanted to be able to provide for them, to ensure a safe and comfortable life for them independent of her reliance on Keith and his career in finance. She loved her husband dearly, but she had seen how hard it had been for the women in her family when they ended up alone. Sarah's father had died when she was young. Her uncle had encountered challenges in his marriage, and her sister had faced difficulties with her partner. Sarah would be determined to have children only when she knew she could care for them properly. Keith had always wanted kids terribly. This was something that he and Sarah agreed on not long after they began seriously dating. He wanted to pass on his family name, and he wanted to share his knowledge and experiences with his children. The man had even kept a few baby clothes he had picked up over the years. What sort of man bought baby clothes? A kind, decent, giving, loving man. That's who. Keith embodied all of these qualities and so many more. Above all of this, Keith was supremely respectful. He understood Sarah's worries about children and being able to provide for them. So, in the time they had been together, they had purchased a house that was now almost paid off. They owned 2 cars, free and clear. They had built a decent savings and a vacation fund. Sarah had opened a business, struggled for a few years, earned a tiny foothold, and had now been in the black for several years, with excellent sustainable growth year after year. While Keith made his desires about children known, he accepted Sarah's need for stability and her commentary about how she wanted kids someday and never pushed for anything more. Now, it appeared that someday would apparently never come. The first thing that happened after the doctor consultation was that Sarah went on hormone replacement, an estrogen-progestin pill to be precise. It definitely improved her quality of life. Within a month or so, the uncomfortable symptoms she was experiencing had almost completely gone away. Sarah's desire for closeness, which had diminished for some time, returned with renewed vigor. She was suddenly far more interested in physical connection than she had been for at least 5 years. The hormones were beneficial in another important way, too, providing relief from a long-standing issue that had arisen in their relationship. For a while, Sarah had struggled with discomfort, but now she felt much more at ease. Lube helped, but it could be messy and wasn't perfect, which made Sarah feel less confident, even though her husband always treated it as a non-issue. These factors might have contributed to why she and Keith hadn't been intimate as often as they could have. However, the pills seemed to address that. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt more comfortable and responsive. The next change was that Sarah started taking Clomid, a common fertility drug. Initially, she felt optimistic. After 6 months on the medication, she had still only experienced one menstrual cycle, and despite their efforts, conceiving was proving challenging. In the past, if they were intimate twice in a week, it felt notable, but now they were more frequent, aiming for success. As time went on, the side effects from Clomid began to accumulate. Sarah found herself feeling increasingly sad and fatigued. She would cry at sentimental television commercials, and her emotional state would be fragile when engaging with deeper stories. It became a struggle to rise from bed, and her mood swings affected her interactions with Keith, sometimes leading to tears after moments of frustration. Predictably, their intimacy suffered once more. After 10 months with little progress, the couple decided to discontinue the Clomid. With Sarah's emotional well-being in mind, they realized that a happier environment was essential for any possibility of conception. Fortunately, within weeks of stopping the medication, her mood improved significantly, leading to a renewed sense of connection with Keith. Desperate to expand their family, Sarah proposed in vitro fertilization, IVF, to Keith. They consulted Dr. Hampton, who advised them to manage their expectations cautiously. IVF is generally only an option for those who are not yet menopausal, he explained. It is quite costly, and given your history, I would have concerns about the prospect of success. Despite this, Sarah remained hopeful. She reasoned that her periodic cycles indicated healthy eggs, and with Keith's strong sperm count, she was optimistic about their chances. It had to work. So, the Fullers paid the exorbitant costs to have a few of Sarah's eggs removed, have them fertilized by Keith's sperm in what amounted to a test tube, then have the best embryo implanted in her uterus. As a cruel twist of fate, Sarah had a positive pregnancy test a month after the procedure, but the pregnancy did not last. 3 days after the test, she experienced significant loss, and that was that. They tried one more time, but nothing came of the second attempt. At more than $13,000 per try, with Dr. Hampton trying his best to talk them out of IVF due to Sarah's low chances of conception, the Fullers made the difficult choice to abandon any further hopes of conceiving. Someday was indeed never going to come. The next few months were a truly dark time in the Fullers' marriage. Keith focused on his work. He had received a promotion at the bank, and while the salary and perks were fantastic, he had to put in longer hours. Sarah, on the other hand, withdrew into herself. She felt like such a failure, like a shadow of her true self. Her friends would joke about their lives, apparently unaware of what Sarah would have given to have those same worries. She grew angry and resentful, much of that anger turned inward. Oh, Keith never said a thing against her. He held her while she cried, assuring her it would be okay. He offered to adopt if she was interested, but he never pressed the issue. He loved her, respected her space, and let her be. And she hated him for it. She had known for years how desperately that kind, gentle, good-hearted man had wanted to be a father, but he never once pushed the issue. He had always respected her choices and boundaries. All he'd ever done was love and cherish her. Fat lot of good that had done him. Likewise, Sarah had realized for a long time that they were financially secure, but she had kept making excuses as to why it just wasn't the right time yet to start a family. What had she been so fearful of? Don't worry, we will have a baby someday. Someday soon, she had loved to say. Now, someday was gone. Sarah wallowed in her loss, in her sadness, in her anger. She bathed in self-pity and loathing. All of those negative feelings manifested themselves in ugly ways. She found herself snapping at Keith for the smallest reasons. She avoided him as much as possible, limiting most of her conversations with him to brief exchanges 7 monosyllables, where possible. Their relationship suffered greatly during this time. 4 months had passed since the Fullers had decided to stop trying to get pregnant. Sarah had dealt with exactly 1 period in that time. She had grown to dread them as just another reminder of her feelings of inadequacy. She couldn't have a baby, so why did she have to put up with the cramps and bloating of a random period here and there? One Friday afternoon, Keith met her at the door while carrying a duffel bag. "What are you doing?" she asked, a look of pique on her face. He corrected. "We are going on a long weekend trip. You have 15 minutes to pack and meet me in the car." Sarah made a face as if to object. "Keith, He cut her off with a raised hand and a firm voice. "Too bad. You're sad and upset all the time. We barely talk. So we are going for a little trip to reconnect and spend time together. You have no choice in the matter." Despite her best efforts, Sarah found herself grinning. "But what do I pack? What are we doing?" Her husband shook his head. "Sorry, no spoilers. Pack something nice. We will have at least one enjoyable meal. Pack something comfortable. We will be outdoors a little bit. We aren't coming back until Monday night. And you now have 13 minutes. Move it." Sarah tried to be annoyed. She had so much to do, she was. She was kidding herself. Maybe this was exactly what she needed. Maybe she needed to get out of these 4 walls, out of her routine, out of this environment, and mentally reset. Just the 2 of them with no real-life distractions would be good for her. She made it to the car door with 90 seconds to spare. They drove for a couple of hours, stopped and got takeout Chinese from a sketchy spot in a strip mall in the middle of nowhere, then drove another hour. Keith pulled up to a quaint little cabin, explaining how he'd found it on Airbnb. They went inside and discovered that it was almost as tacky as a place could possibly be. Every surface seemed to be covered with ducks-mounted duck decor, duck art, duck signs, duck throws. It was awful. It was glorious. With a trip back out to the car, Keith reappeared and began setting up a chocolate fountain. He got it going with less mess than Sarah might have guessed, broke out strawberries and marshmallows to dip into the liquid chocolate, and uncorked a bottle of sparkling cider to enjoy with their dessert. While it might have been a little corny, it was flagrantly romantic, and Sarah found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't managed in weeks, if not months. That night, they connected and truly enjoyed each other's company for the first time in far longer than Sarah could recall. The next morning, Sarah dressed in the outdoorsy clothing that Keith had suggested: a fitted blouse, comfortable shorts, hiking boots. Soon enough, they were exiting their car at a place that called itself an air park. Looking at the shapes in the air, it hit her that Keith had signed them up to go hang gliding, long time, someday I'll try type activity from her bucket list. Sarah was nervous, but she dutifully watched the little instructional video the place offered, then strapped on a helmet and goggles. Her instructora, sun-kissed, blonde-haired surfer type named Mark, was friendly and engaging. His easy smile helped take her mind off her nerves. Soon, they were buckled in together, and a couple of minutes later, they were towed into the sky by a tiny, ultralight aircraft. The complete flight time couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 minutes, but the experience was absolutely glorious. The feeling of flying, the wind holding her up with the valley so small beneath her. The absolute freedom was nearly surreal. She focused intently on the experience, guided by her instructor as he helped her properly grip and operate the bar. After she touched down and got out of the harness, she found Keith and embraced him. "Thank you," she murmured in his ear. They spent another half hour at the air park while waiting for the instructors to download video from their GoPros into thumb drives to take home. Keith noticed that while he waited his turn, Sarah's instructor hung around the waiting area and was being particularly friendly with his wife. Sarah pretended to overlook it, but Keith noticed she seemed slightly restless. It struck Keith that Sarah was enjoying the attention. Keith felt a mix of surprise and curiosity. He couldn't remember seeing Sarah act this way before. Surely he should say something, right? Yet he couldn't seem to find the motivation to intervene. Instead, he chatted idly and surfed his phone, pretending not to notice what was going on. Finally, the time came to leave. Keith shook his instructor's hand as a goodbye. Mark leaned in to give Sarah a warm hug, and she appeared to accept it without hesitation. When they reached the car, Keith gave his wife a sideways glance and a smirk. "Have a good time?" he asked. "Oh, absolutely," Sarah replied with a smile. "The flight was amazing." Keith noted the slight flush on her cheeks and recognized her excitement. "I'll bet," he observed dryly. "But really, I was talking about the time afterward." Sarah blushed. "I don't know what you mean," she offered weakly. Keith laughed. "Sure you don't. Your California dude there seemed to be a big fan, and you didn't seem to mind." Sarah started to object, but Keith cut her off. "Don't worry," he offered. "I'm not mad. I know that you are going home with me. I don't mind that he got you a little riled up. It was kind of exciting. I figure that only means good things for me later." Embarrassed, Sarah turned on the radio and pretended to not know what her husband was talking about. The couple paid a visit to Duckland Cabin, as Keith dubbed it, to freshen up for dinner. While Keith certainly cleaned up well, Sarah looked stunning in a form-fitting violet dress that he couldn't remember ever seeing before. He couldn't resist expressing his admiration. "You look fantastic in that," he exclaimed. "I don't remember seeing it before." The brunette gave him a grin. "Why this old thing?" she asked, giving a half-twirl. "I only wear this when I don't care what I look like." Keith laughed and shared a light moment with her. She playfully pushed him away. "Cut that out," she protested. "You'll mess up my makeup, and you promised me a nice dinner." Grinning, the two of them made their way out from beneath the gaze of the ducks and to their car. Dinner that night was a trendy affair in a little restaurant that Keith had found recommended in a local dining forum. The outside of the place was a little questionable. It looked for all the world like a house, and probably had been. The interior was nothing special, definitely holding up the idea of a converted residence, but the food was impressive. The owner himself made rounds of the place, checking in on everyone. The restaurant was an obvious labor of love, and the quality of the cuisine reflected that fact. As they walked out, arm in arm, Sarah laid her head on Keith's shoulder. It had been a wonderful day. She felt more relaxed and positive than she had in longer than she could recall. "So, back to Duckland?" she asked with a grin. "Not quite yet," Keith answered. "I was thinking that we'd go dancing for a bit first." "What?" Sarah asked, a look of surprise on her face. Keith had never been one for dancing. They had stopped going out to clubs and such years ago. "But you don't even like to—" "Hush," he cut her off. "The entire point of this trip was to reset your perspective a bit, to break out of the ruts that we've been in. So let's go dance. We aren't so old that they won't let us in a club, especially given how you are dressed." Sarah started to argue, but a night out did sound like fun. What did she have to lose? When they pulled up to the club, the parking lot was still fairly empty. It was really too early for the festivities to have truly started. Once inside, the couple found seats at the bar and ordered drinks to help pass the time and ease the shyness of dancing in public. It came as no real surprise to Keith the first time that a guy sat down on the other side of Sarah and ordered her a drink. At first, she politely declined, but Keith laughed and waved at the guy, who chatted for a bit before moving on to another part of the club. That would not be the only drink that night. It became a bit of a joke for the couple how the men would approach Sarah, buy her drinks, and then step back when they realized she was with Keith. Sarah was a little surprised at how relaxed Keith was about the interest the men were showing, but he seemed unfazed by the attention. At one point, she leaned in and asked him about it. "Aren't you upset that these guys are chatting with me?" she asked, raising her voice to be heard over the music. Her husband laughed. "Why would I be?" he replied. "You're going home with me. I just see it as proof that I'm with a wonderful woman that anyone would notice." The lack of jealousy puzzled Sarah a bit, but Keith did have a point. There wasn't a real risk of her being swayed by someone else. And if she was honest with herself, it made her feel good to know that so many strangers were interested in her company. The alcohol and the attention had her feeling relaxed, confident, and happy. As the night went on, the seat next to Sarah was filled by several different guys, all hoping for a chance to chat with her. They invariably bought her drinks, though they always retreated after realizing she was with Keith. Eventually, though, that changed. The Fullers had been at the club for about 2 hours, drinking, laughing, and chatting together. The seat next to Sarah had been empty for no more than 5 minutes when a new man slid into the chair. "Mind if I take this seat?" a tall, athletic man in his early 40s asked. Sarah smiled and shook her head as he sat down. Predictably, he signaled for the bartender, ordered a beer for himself and one of whatever Sarah was having, even though it was clear that Keith was right there with her. When the drinks arrived, the newcomer raised his glass to Keith with a grin. Unlike the previous guys, Ben, as he introduced himself, didn't seem concerned about Keith's presence. He chatted with both members of the couple, making polite small talk with incredible ease, especially given the noise level of the club. Eventually, he addressed Sarah directly. "Now tell me, ma'am," he asked with a touch of a drawl, "why is a lovely lady such as yourself not taking part in the fun on the dance floor?" As he spoke, he gestured with his beer toward the floor that had begun to fill up. Sarah laughed. "It's been a while since I've danced in public," she admitted. "I don't know that I'm brave enough, and Keith has never been a huge dancer." Ben grinned widely, flashing a bright smile. "Well, if your husband doesn't mind, I would be honored if you'd allow me to accompany you for a dance." Sarah was a little surprised at the request and glanced at Keith, who shrugged. "Have fun," he offered. Despite feeling unsure, Sarah allowed the stranger to take her by the hand and lead her onto the dance floor. She was incredibly nervous, but he didn't seem to notice at all. Soon enough, she picked up the beat and was at least holding her own, while Ben proved to be an excellent dance partner. Before long, the combined influences of the music and the attention she received had Sarah relaxed enough to truly enjoy the dancing. Keith watched the entire thing with a bemused expression. Ben was a complete gentleman on the dance floor. Either way, he wasn't worried. Sarah would be going home with him. Frankly, he hoped she might get a little more spirited as the night went on. So he didn't mind at all when he saw Ben steering Sarah back to the bar with a supportive gesture at her back. Sarah was grinning uncontrollably, slightly flushed from the effort. "Have fun?" Keith asked with a smile. His wife laughed as she slid back into her seat. "Definitely. I'm out of practice, but Ben is a good partner." The other man smiled and nodded, then spoke up. "Why don't we grab that open table?" he suggested, gesturing. "It'll be a lot easier to move in and out of without worrying about anyone taking our seats." The suggestion made a lot of sense. After a little more chatting and another round of drinks at the new location, Sarah found herself being led back out onto the floor this time, displaying far less hesitation. The next hour and a half was spent with Sarah dancing her heart out. Ben was her primary partner, though she also convinced Keith to join her for a dance or two. A couple of times she found herself dancing with others on the floor. As the night went on, Ben and Sarah became more comfortable with one another. Although his hands remained mostly at her waist, there were moments when they shared close proximity, creating a lively atmosphere around them. She grew so accustomed to it that when a stranger unexpectedly touched her on the dance floor, she didn't even respond. And there was no denying that a couple of times when Ben danced close behind her, she could feel a presence from him that was hard to ignore. Early on, she would glance around, searching for Keith, feeling guilty about these interactions. But any time she made eye contact with her husband, he would only smile and wave, seemingly unfazed, which reassured her that she wasn't behaving too badly. Keith could see the look on his wife's face and noticed a change in her demeanor. She was definitely intoxicated, but not overly so. After she and Ben returned to the table, he took her mention of being tired as an opportunity to suggest they head back to the cabin for the night. Ben looked disappointed. "But the night is still young," he protested with a charming grin. "Perhaps the two of you might join me for a nightcap," he offered hopefully. Keith glanced at Sarah, then at Ben. It was clear that Ben wanted to spend more time with Sarah, but Keith preferred to be alone with his wife. "Not tonight," he replied politely. "Maybe some other time." Ben gave a rueful grin. "Fair enough. Perhaps I could trouble Miss Sarah for a goodnight gesture at least." Sarah rolled her eyes at Keith but leaned forward to touch her lips to the other man's cheek. As she did, she noticed an unusual look on her husband's face. Without quite knowing why, when Ben turned, she leaned in and gave him a quick, friendly gesture on the lips as well, which surprised both men. She grinned at their reactions, and then stood to walk away. "Good night, Ben. Thanks for the dancing." She shot a glance at Keith. "Are you coming, sweetheart?" she asked playfully. The Fullers stepped out into the night air and walked to the car together, a slight ringing in their ears replacing the relentless thump from inside the club. As they walked, Keith cast a sideways look at Sarah. "What was that?" he asked evenly. Sarah gave a slightly lopsided grin, the effects of the evening evident on her face. "What, that little gesture?" she replied coyly. Keith realized his mouth was dry and his heart raced. "Yes, exactly that!" he exclaimed. "You just kissed another man and right there in front of everyone!" Sarah weighed her response and decided to be honest. "Well, it didn't seem like you had any objection to him being close to me for the past hour or so," she stated. "In fact, it seemed like you might have been enjoying it, so I thought I'd see how you felt about everything." She paused and looked at her husband. "Are you upset?" she asked. "I didn't mean anything by it. I was just teasing you a little." Keith interrupted her by playfully pushing her against their car, leaning in close. Sarah was taken by surprise, but soon shared in the playful moment, responding with a light-hearted smile. He pulled back slightly with a playful smirk. "Just as I suspected," he said. "You seem a bit flushed. What's going on?" Blushing, she stammered. Well, Keith chuckled. "Get in the car," he said. "We're going back to the cabin, and I promise it will be a memorable night." Sarah smiled at his enthusiasm. "I'm going to hold you to that," she said teasingly. Their time at the cabin was some of the best that the couple had shared in months, if not years. The atmosphere was charged with playful banter. Keith jokingly pointed out how Sarah seemed to attract attention. Sarah playfully teased him back, acknowledging how he reacted to the compliments she received while dancing. They enjoyed the light-hearted exchanges, feeding off each other's energy, creating a deeper connection throughout the evening. The following morning began with a bit of awkwardness in the air. "So, about last night," Keith began hesitantly. Sarah placed a finger to his lips. "Hush," she said gently. "Not right now. We had a great night. Let's keep it that way." The rest of the trip was delightful. The couple attended a wine tasting, visited some cozy restaurants, and savored each other's company. There was no doubt they felt a new spark in their relationship, but for a few days they didn't discuss Sarah's interactions with others. By the following weekend, Keith decided it was time to bring it up again. "Baby," he started, "we need to talk." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "I thought that was a woman's opening line," she replied, half joking. Keith gave a weak grin. "Look, it's about last weekend. We keep dancing around it, but I see the look on your face sometimes. I know you're thinking about it." He hesitated for a moment. "And honestly, I am thinking about it too." "About what exactly?" Sarah asked, encouraging him to get to the point. "About others paying attention to me? About me responding to that? About it turning you on? What exactly are you getting at?" she pressed. He took a deep breath. "About all of it," he admitted. "And the fantasies, too." The reply apparently caught Sarah flat-footed. "Oh," was all she could muster in reply. "Look," he began, "I've been reading some things online." Sarah started to speak, but he raised his hand and persisted. "I was feeling guilty. Weird. What kind of man thinks about his wife being flirtatious with others?" The look on Sarah's face was unreadable. Keith felt like he was falling as he kept talking, but it was now or never. As it turns out, a lot of men find this intriguing. There are communities online where people share thoughts and ideas about it. "Like swingers or something?" Sarah asked, her face still neutral. "Kind of like that," Keith nodded. "But it seems like many who use that term are more about exchanging partners. You see lots of specific terms for this: cuckold, hot wife, stag, and vixen. It can get quite detailed, but many couples enjoy the idea of exploring flirtation." Sarah still maintained an aloof expression. "So because other people are interested in this, it's okay for us? Is that it?" she asked, her voice growing a bit firm. "You've decided that because I had a little fun with some guys, it means I should just start dating other men now?" Keith was a little surprised at her tone. "What?" he asked. "I don't understand. Why are you upset? We had a good time, and you even said so the next morning. I'm not suggesting we have to do anything, but I thought that fantasy angle was exciting for both of us. So why wouldn't we consider exploring it? And also," Keith paused, weighing his next point carefully. "As I recall, you seemed intrigued by your hang gliding instructor before we even started drinking." Sarah opened her mouth to argue, but Keith's expression wasn't accusing or insulting. And the fact was, he was right. She had felt a thrill well before they had celebrated that evening. As she considered, she deflated a bit. "You're right," she admitted in a softer tone. "Okay, fine. Now what?" What are you hoping for? That we go out and meet someone tonight? Keith smiled and shook his head at her uncertain attitude. No, not at all, he assured her. I was thinking we could explore some things together. Maybe look up some information online, see what people say. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Research? That sounds like you're hinting at something else. He chuckled. I mean, we could read forums, see what others do, and understand why they do it. Maybe explore ideas that interest us. The suggestion felt strange to Sarah, but she couldn't find a strong reason to oppose it. Before long, they had booted up the laptop and were browsing online forums. While some discussions seemed extreme to Sarah, like unusual habits and preferences, others reflected more ordinary experiences. They decided that many of the extreme ideas didn't suit them, but the concept of exploring attention from others in a safe, mutual way intrigued them. They spent some time reading stories and learning how different couples navigated these dynamics, expanding their perspectives. Although they came across various materials, they found that not all of it resonated with them. What struck them most was how diverse people's interests could be. Despite her initial reservations, Sarah found herself more comfortable as they discussed these new ideas together. Seeing it happen on screen felt a little strange, a little taboo, and for whatever reason, seemed to intrigue her even more. Finally, she couldn't take it any longer. In the middle of another movie where the characters were engaged in an intimate scenario, she reached for Keith's hand and placed it on her thigh. Baby, you've proved your point, she said, a slight breathlessness in her voice. Feel me, please. I'm really excited about this. Keith obliged, allowing his fingers to explore with gentle curiosity. He was pleased to discover how responsive she was. It felt good to be right for once. He had been sure that she would be into this if she would only give it a chance. However, Keith was mindful. Rather than dwell on his initial confidence, he focused on the moment, encouraging their connection further. They could talk more later. For now, it was about enjoying each other. Thus began a new phase of the Fullers' relationship. They found themselves engaging in research 2 or 3 nights per week. Sometimes that meant browsing various forums about their interests. Other times, they simply watched movies together. Conversations about their desires became a regular part of their time together. Keith discovered that he could make little comments about people who caught her eye in everyday situations, and it would spark her imagination and excitement without fail. While these conversations were frequent and had become a significant element of their shared fantasies, the Fullers seemed hesitant to take any serious steps toward making anything happen. Until finally, after weeks of research, teasing, and shared daydreams, they decided to visit a lively bar one Friday night. Sarah felt a bit self-conscious as they walked across the parking lot. They had enjoyed a nice dinner at a fairly fancy restaurant, and she felt slightly out of place. Keith reassured her, and soon enough they were seated at the bar. He had chosen their seats carefully, ensuring that a spot remained open next to his wife. Before long, someone filled that seat. While this was no dance club, the bar featured live music, pool tables, and reasonably priced drinks. It was already a bustling atmosphere inside. Unbeknownst to Sarah, Keith had done some research and chosen this venue for its lively social scene. When the first person took the seat next to her and offered her a drink, he felt his efforts might have been worthwhile. As before, Sarah found the space next to her occupied more often than not. People approached, offering her drinks and engaging her in light conversation. They usually would leave not too long after realizing that Keith was Sarah's husband, but one guy chatted with her for a good half hour before leaving. Eventually, Kurt sat down. Kurt had salt and pepper hair cropped quite short, a square jaw, piercing blue eyes, and an easy smile. He seemed unbothered by the fact that Keith was Sarah's husband, and even bought Keith a beer. Unlike most of the guys who quickly started scanning the room after confirming that Sarah was married, Keith continued to focus on her, smiling and sharing jokes and stories. He was friendly, punctuating anecdotes with a light touch on Sarah's hand or arm from time to time. For her part, the brunette didn't seem to mind the attention. She laughed at every joke, kept a constant smile on her face, and appeared to hang on every one of Kurt's words, her green eyes sparkling with energy. After Kurt got up to take a break, Keith leaned in. He's definitely interested in you, he whispered to Sarah. He wants to get to know you better. Sarah laughed. "I'm married. He knows I'm with you," she protested. The brunette was more than a little tipsy. She'd had a couple of glasses of wine with dinner and several drinks at the bar. Even so, she felt a stronger sense of the situation than her husband. He seemed to be letting his imagination get the best of him. As they spotted Kurt returning to the table, Keith stood up. "He knows that," he told Sarah, "but I don't think that matters to him. I'm telling you, he's definitely interested, and you don't seem to mind his company." Sarah grinned, perhaps a bit flustered. "Be right back. I need to step out," Keith said as Kurt slid back in next to his wife. The line for the restroom took far longer than Keith had anticipated. Apparently there was only one stall and one urinal. For whatever reason, the line moved very slowly. What should have been a quick stop turned into a nearly 15-minute ordeal. As Keith stood in line, his thoughts wandered to what Sarah might be up to. Had Kurt taken the opportunity to get closer to his wife while Keith was away? Would Sarah respond positively to those efforts? Surely she wouldn't go too far, but the idea of her being receptive to some guy's attention in the bar made Keith's heart race. As he washed his hands, Keith shook his head. Sure, this Kurt guy thought that his wife was attractive, but it seemed that Keith's imagination was running wild. Sarah would likely still be engaged in polite conversation, nothing more. By the time Keith returned to his seat, Kurt may well have moved on. Still, Keith found that he couldn't quite shake his thoughts, nor could he control his racing heart. His mouth felt dry as he walked down the small hallway, past the line of men still waiting for the bathroom. Upon stepping out into the main area of the bar again, he scanned the crowd for his wife, and his heart seemed to skip a beat when he spotted her. Sarah was adjusting herself, pulling away from the man seated next to her. From his angle behind them, he felt a sudden unease at the sight of Kurt's hand resting on Sarah's leg. The way she moved suggested she had just stepped away from an intimate moment. As he slid into his seat beside Sarah, she managed a weak smile but quickly glanced away, her face slightly flushed. Kurt smiled at Keith, made eye contact, and continued their conversation as if nothing was amiss. However, Keith noticed that the older man had his hand on Sarah's leg, which had crept up her dress. Keith felt caught off guard. While the contact wasn't overtly inappropriate, it was an undeniable indication of the man's interest in his wife, as well as Sarah's acceptance of it. "Babe," Sarah started in a slightly hesitant tone. "Kurt was telling me about his TV. It's one of those OLED models we were discussing." Kurt smoothly chimed in. "It's a new LG, a flagship model with a 70-inch screen. Sarah mentioned that you two were considering upgrading your set at home." "Uh-huh," Keith responded absently. Truth be told, he remembered only a few brief conversations about a new TV. They didn't watch much television to begin with, and Sarah likely cared less about having the latest technology than he did. As he tried not to focus on what was happening, it became evident that Kurt was gradually making his way up Sarah's leg. She appeared flustered and a bit distant, her gaze mostly fixed ahead rather than meeting either man's eyes. "My condo is only 10 minutes away," the older man offered. "If you two would like to see one in a real-life setting, instead of hanging on a huge wall with 30 other displays in a store." The bar felt disorienting to Keith. He and Sarah had discussed and daydreamed about such encounters. He had chosen this bar with the hope that she would be approached, and now here they were, in a crowded bar with an unfamiliar man too close for comfort. The offer floated between them, lost in the noise of the environment. Sarah turned to look at her husband. Her face was a mixture of conflicting emotions, with apprehension evident. Suddenly, her gaze seemed distracted. Keith was about to ask if everything was all right when he noticed the man's hand placed inappropriately, creating a tense moment for him. Keith realized he faced a critical decision. It was clear to him that it was time to leave the bar. He could take Sarah's hand and walk away, preserving their relationship despite the awkward circumstances. Although some difficult conversations might follow, they could keep this as a strange experience rather than letting it escalate. Alternatively, they could drive to this man's home under the pretext of seeing a new television. However, it was clear to everyone involved that the invitation carried implications beyond mere interest in electronics. When Sarah regained her focus, her eyes conveyed a sense of urgency, seeking direction from him. What was she truly looking for? What choice should he make when it felt like the decision lay in his hands? Kurt's voice broke the silence. "I also have a nice sound system if you're interested," he said casually, as if discussing the television and not a much more questionable invitation. Keith looked at Sarah's expectant expression and took a breath before responding. Sure, Kurt. It might be worth checking out the television," he said carefully. "We can see if it's something we'd be interested in." Kurt smiled, and after withdrawing his hand, signaled to the bartender. "I'd like to close out my tab, please," he called out, gesturing to Keith and Sarah. "I'll be covering theirs as well." Sarah glanced at Keith, her expression hard to read. He felt a chill as they stood up, tension lingering as they exited the bar. The drive to Kurt's condo felt surreal. Traffic was light at this time of night, making it easy to follow the silver sedan ahead. Sarah sat nervously next to Keith in their car. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice uncertain. "We just met this guy. Fantasy is one thing, but doing this in real life, are you sure? There's no going back." Keith gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing as they turned behind Kurt's car. "Listen," he said softly. "We don't have to do anything you're uncomfortable with. Nothing matters more to me than you." He paused before continuing. "But it's clear we're both excited right now. We've talked about this, fantasized about it. But if you have any doubts, we stop." Sarah looked at him, still hesitant. "Fantasy is different. This is real." Keith nodded as they pulled into the parking lot. "You're right, it is real. But no matter what happens, we're still us. If we leave now, though, you'll always wonder about what could have happened. If it doesn't feel right, we'll leave. No pressure." Sarah relaxed a little, a small smile forming on her face. "Okay," she replied softly. The condo was tastefully decorated, and Kurt played the role of a welcoming host. He offered them drinks and showed them around. Soon, they found themselves in the living room, dimly lit, with an impressive television taking center stage. Kurt settled onto one end of the couch, gesturing for Sarah to sit beside him, while Keith sat on her other side, recreating the seating arrangement from earlier. After flipping through a few channels, Kurt grinned. "You ever seen anything on a screen this big?" he asked. Sarah smirked. "I never have," she replied with amusement. The three of them watched in silence for a few moments, the only sounds coming from the speakers as they sat together quietly. Keith sat, observing the scene unfolding with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. Kurt, breaking the silence, turned to the couple. "I'm going to be honest," he said. "I've been feeling a lot of energy tonight." He paused for a moment before adding, "Do you mind if I just relax a bit?" Sarah glanced at Keith, and after a moment she gave a slight nod, trying to remain composed. Kurt made no overt moves and simply settled into the casual atmosphere. Sarah, clearly uneasy at first, gradually tried to shift her focus, avoiding eye contact and concentrating on keeping things light. Keith noticed her fidgeting, a clear sign of discomfort, but also of underlying tension. Unsure how to move forward, they all sat for a while, unsure of how to continue the evening. Keith eventually leaned over to Sarah, quietly encouraging her to relax and reminding her that everything was her choice, reinforcing his support. With that, Sarah seemed to ease a little, finding her comfort in the situation as the group returned to a more casual conversation. The tension in the air eventually subsided, and they spent the rest of the evening with no further expectations, keeping things light and friendly. In moments, Kurt lightly touched Sarah's arm, but the atmosphere remained calm, with everyone trying to maintain a sense of ease. Sarah glanced at Keith, who gave her a supportive nod, silently communicating his assurance. Kurt complimented her with a quiet remark, and the group continued to engage in casual conversation. The evening unfolded with the trio maintaining a relaxed and friendly tone, allowing the situation to remain comfortable for everyone involved. Keith, sensing the moment had reached its natural conclusion, suggested they wrap up for the night. They all exchanged smiles and decided to call it a night, thankful for the open conversation and mutual respect that guided their evening together. The tension that had initially filled the room dissipated as they parted ways with a sense of relief and understanding, maintaining the bond they shared without any pressure or awkwardness. Keith stood by, watching the scene unfold as emotions surged through him, ranging from disbelief to confusion. He saw the older man acting with confidence, and despite the tension in the air, everything felt surreal to Keith. He struggled with a mix of feelings as the moment continued, realizing the gravity of their actions. As Kurt made his move, Keith's mind raced with thoughts of what this meant for their relationship, their boundaries, and the choices they had made. The atmosphere in the room was charged, but Keith knew there was no going back from this point. They had ventured into uncharted territory, and Keith grappled with the weight of that realization. His mind was filled with conflicting thoughts as he tried to process the experience, unsure of how they would navigate the future after this night. The room remained quiet as each person reflected on the choices that had led them here, and what this new step meant for all of them. The room was quiet, save for the occasional murmur from the group as they continued their evening together. Kurt and Keith exchanged glances as they observed Sarah, who remained composed though clearly caught up in the moment. The atmosphere in the room shifted as the three navigated the boundaries of their shared experience, each contemplating the weight of the choices they had made. Keith, filled with a whirlwind of emotions, watched as the situation unfolded. It was clear that they had entered uncharted territory, and the significance of this moment was not lost on anyone. With the tension building, the group tried to maintain a balance between their curiosity and the reality of their actions. Though the night continued, there was an unspoken understanding between them. Each was aware that the experience they shared would have lasting implications on their relationships and their own personal boundaries. The focus shifted to mutual respect, allowing for open communication and ensuring everyone felt comfortable. In the end, they realized that some experiences were meant to be explored thoughtfully, with care and consideration. The evening drew to a close with an unspoken agreement to reflect on what had transpired and to move forward together, having gained new insights and understanding. The drive home was filled with silence. After everything had transpired, the atmosphere in the room had turned somewhat awkward. Sarah and Keith had quickly dressed, said their goodbyes, and left Kurt's place without much conversation. Keith glanced at his wife, concerned about what she might be feeling. Her quietness weighed on him, especially considering how she had reacted to situations in the past when emotions ran high. Still, Keith couldn't help but reflect on the evening. Sarah had been actively engaged, from flirting with Kurt earlier in the night to her clear interest in the experience. Despite his concerns, he knew they would need to talk about everything at some point, but for now, the car ride remained somber, with both of them deep in thought. Surely it couldn't have been that terrible for her. When they stepped into their foyer, he was just about to say something to open communication when Sarah turned and approached him, sharing a deep, meaningful kiss. Keith was slightly taken aback, but as Sarah expressed her feelings, the importance of thinking faded away. In moments, there was a sense of urgency and longing in the air. "I need you," the brunette said in a passionate tone. "I've experienced something with another man, and I need you to help me feel whole again." Sarah moved closer, conveying her desire in a way that made it clear she sought connection. There was no doubt about her sincerity. She wanted to reconnect with her husband. Who was he to deny that? That night marked a serious new milestone in the Fullers' marriage. Yes, there were meaningful discussions about the situation, but the fact remained that they both had navigated their feelings in a way that brought them closer. Conversations and fantasies were all well and good, but the reality of Sarah's journey of self-discovery was eye-opening for both of them. It was evident that attention from others had a significant effect on Sarah. Learning that she could not have children had left a profound impact on her spirit. It had made her feel inadequate, challenging her self-esteem. Keith had always been incredibly supportive, complimenting her deeply. Yet, while his love was unwavering, it sometimes felt like he had an obligation to find her attractive, which contrasted with how others perceived her. The attention from other men offered Sarah a sense of validation. Understanding that, despite her challenges, she was still viewed as attractive and desirable was a significant boost for her confidence. In the following days and weeks, Sarah found herself in a cycle of positive reinforcement. Knowing that Kurt and others found her appealing, she began to carry herself differently. She gravitated towards clothing that enhanced her natural curves, embodying a newfound confidence. As she smiled more and engaged with others, The reaction from those around her mirrored her growing self-assurance, which in turn boosted her confidence even more. It would be remiss to ignore the benefits that Keith received from this new breakthrough. Suddenly, there were real aspects to the fantasies and ideas he had been sharing with his wife. It was one thing to imagine how something might be. It was quite another to have actually experienced it. He had seen his wife firsthand in a situation that deepened their connection. He had witnessed her express herself in ways he had never before seen. So now, any fantasies and conversations were backed up by the reality they had shared. Furthermore, now that Sarah seemed to truly understand, perhaps for the first time in her life, her appeal, she began to act with newfound confidence. She had started to flirt more, to showcase her personality. This boost in her self-confidence invigorated their relationship, and the positive energy was infectious. Sarah's enthusiasm had never been higher. She was dressing with more flair, engaging in playful banter, and often initiating discussions about their shared experiences. In short, their relationship had never felt this vibrant. One night, a few weeks after their visit to Kurt's condo, Keith and Sarah were reading stories from others who were into wife-sharing. "It's funny," Sarah opined, "just how many of these supposedly real encounters have the other guy being quite involved. Don't these people worry about health risks? What about unexpected consequences?" She sighed. "We know that isn't a concern for me, but still, who wants to take chances with their health?" Keith paused before responding thoughtfully. "You're right," he stated cautiously. "But that said, I understand. I mean, from a fantasy standpoint, I would have preferred that certain things were done differently." Sarah looked a little surprised. "Really? What makes that such a big deal?" Her husband shook his head. "I'm not sure. It's a primal thing, I guess. It's natural, it's raw, it's real. Knowing that my wife is enjoying herself with another person in an intimate way, it's quite captivating in a unique manner." Her expression suggested she wasn't fully convinced. "Maybe, I guess. I just feel like I'd be worried about health issues." Keith chuckled lightly. "It is possible to get tested, you know. People talk about being responsible. Testing is surely part of that. Obviously, that rules out anything random, but I could see the thrill in taking that next step. Imagining that sort of connection, that's intriguing." Sarah felt a shiver of curiosity at the intensity of her husband's enthusiasm. Maybe he had a point. "Okay, fair enough," she answered. "Maybe someday we can explore that idea," she said as she leaned in to share a gentle moment with him. The laptop and other people's stories were soon forgotten. Keith had grown accustomed to Sarah's "some days," as meaning some nebulous time in the distant future, if they ever came at all. 2 nights later, Keith was surprised when Sarah suggested they post an ad online to find a man to meet specifically, someone who had been recently tested and could be trusted. This felt like a significant step. In the past, Sarah had occasionally responded to attention from other men, but this time she was taking the initiative. Keith's heart raced at the idea of Sarah being the one to propose something like this, actively looking for someone to meet. After a couple of days of sorting through responses and filtering out unsuitable candidates, they finally settled on a man named Mike. He was in his early 40s, friendly and approachable. His charm and genuine nature helped him stand out, and Sarah enjoyed their conversations over the following days. Mike had been recently divorced and mentioned that dating had been challenging, so he was exploring new possibilities. They arranged to meet Mike at a popular bar 2 weeks later. Keith thought it best to meet in public in case things didn't go well, giving them an easy way to exit if necessary. The days leading up to the meeting passed slowly. Keith and Sarah frequently discussed the upcoming encounter, and the anticipation built between them. They talked about the possibilities and how they felt about everything, preparing for what would be a new experience for both of them. On the Wednesday before the planned meetup, Sarah lay beside Keith on their bed, her arm resting across his chest as they relaxed after another intimate night. It had been an eventful time for the couple, and they found themselves growing closer as they prepared for the next step in their journey. They were spending time together in the evening, in the afternoon, and in the morning, sometimes even in the middle of the night, if one of them woke up with ideas in mind. As she pondered this fact, Sarah had an idea. "Hey, baby," she offered. "Something just hit me. Something to make Saturday night even more exciting. Keith chuckled. I can't imagine what we could have missed, or what else we could add, he replied. But I'm game. What's your idea? Well, she suggested, what if we skip intimacy until Saturday? It's just 2 more days, and as eager as we've both been, I bet we will be very much looking forward to Saturday night. By skipping intimacy, do you mean no physical affection? Keith asked. Or no intimacy at all? No touching, no secret glances, nothing at all? Sarah nodded. Nothing at all. The idea is we don't get any release until then. No subtle touches, no secret moments together or alone. Think of how badly we'll want it by then. While Keith wasn't entirely sure about the idea, he had to admit that there was a certain thrill that appealed to him. And Sarah had a point. By Saturday night, they would both be so eager that the shared moments would be even more special. All right, he spoke after a moment to consider it. No intimacy until Saturday night, but man, this is going to be challenging. Yeah, I think it will be tough, Sarah agreed, but I also think it will be worth it. The Fullers were surprised at how difficult it was to skip intimacy on Thursday. Their close bond had picked up so much lately that it had become a part of their daily routine. Their bodies seemed to expect it, and neither of them was particularly happy about missing out. It was challenging to fall asleep that night without any form of connection. Friday was even harder. Keith had to focus on anything else at work to distract himself from the thoughts that kept coming to mind. But if he thought that he had it bad, poor Sarah was feeling the effects too. She woke up feeling restless, and it only got more intense from there. At work, she found herself daydreaming about her time with her husband and about tomorrow night's plans. But she was so distracted that she found herself glancing around more than usual, which led to several embarrassing moments throughout the day. Speaking of work challenges, Keith was called to a VP's office after lunch, where he learned that his boss would be unable to make a planned business trip on Monday due to health issues. Keith would have to fly out on Sunday afternoon to take his place, and wouldn't be back until Wednesday. While this was great for his career, it meant that he and Sarah wouldn't be able to relive their anticipated excitement for several days. That night, going to bed was even harder. Both Keith and Sarah felt incredibly tense, making sleep very difficult to find. Overall, Friday was just challenging. Finally, Saturday arrived. The Fullers each found themselves excited and nervous. Keith felt a flutter of anticipation from the moment he woke up. Today marked a significant day in their relationship, one that both he and Sarah had been involved in planning. It was a departure from the norm, and though exciting, it felt a bit overwhelming. On the other hand, Sarah appeared to be lost in a mix of emotions. She was distracted, fidgeting in her chair whenever she sat down. Various thoughts played through her mind in an endless loop. She found herself thinking about connection and intimacy. Throughout the day, while managing household chores in preparation for their evening, she was aware of needing to change her clothing due to feeling uncomfortable. When it was time to get ready to go out, Keith and Sarah did their best to approach the evening like any normal date. They planned to visit a cafe that they loved, then head to a bar an hour or so before their guest was expected, believing that having a couple of drinks might help ease their nerves. Keith dressed in a polo shirt and khakis, while Sarah chose a green sundress and low heels, accessorized with silver earrings and a necklace that highlighted her outfit. As they walked to the car, Sarah felt a shiver from the breeze. It was a welcome distraction from her anxious thoughts. Keith's phone buzzed. "Is it him?" Sarah asked. Keith grinned and nodded, then showed her the text. "Looking forward to meeting you both?" Sarah felt a thrill of anticipation. The dinner was cozy and enjoyable. The Fullers tried to keep the conversation light, discussing work, friends, family, avoiding the underlying reason for their outing. Despite the effort to maintain a casual tone, Sarah couldn't seem to sit still, subtly aware of her emotions. She had concerns about how the evening would unfold. Eventually, the meal came to an end. Keith paid the tab and the two of them walked out to their car. "Ready to head to the bar?" he asked. She smiled. "I don't know where else we would go." Keith shrugged and they drove away. 15 minutes later, they found a parking spot at the bar Mike had suggested. As they made their way inside, they discovered two things. One, that this place was more club than bar, and two, it was already packed. The couple found seats at the bar and ordered drinks with more than an hour to go before Mike was due to arrive. The volume of the music made it tough to talk effectively. They both were dealing with nerves, and Sarah was feeling a mix of excitement that the vibrations of the loud music wasn't helping. They sipped their drinks and passed the time a little awkwardly. Around 30 minutes after they had gotten their drinks, a tall, handsome man with a shaved head approached Sarah. In between songs, he introduced himself as Aaron and offered her a drink. Sarah gave Keith a questioning glance. He grinned and nodded, so she accepted and gave her own name. The newcomer gave Sarah a big smile, with his bright teeth standing out. "So, you are here for a night of fun with your husband?" he asked, nodding towards Keith. Sarah smiled in reply. "Yes, we are meeting a friend here tonight." Aaron raised his eyebrows. "Is that so? Well, I hope that you have a good time this evening then. Perhaps you would care to dance while you wait?" His accent was distinct, with a formal sound to everything. Sarah suspected that he might be of African descent. The brunette shook her head. "Maybe a little later," she offered, glancing around as if sharing a secret. "I'm a little nervous right now, so I'm trying to enjoy my drink for the moment." The tall man laughed. "My, this sounds like a fun evening ahead." He grinned at Sarah's smile. "Well, I will not disturb you further. I will go and dance now, but perhaps you will join me later." Sarah smiled in response. "You can probably talk me into it." With another radiant smile, Aaron melted into the crowd. Close to 45 minutes had passed since the Fullers had arrived at the club. Sarah and Keith were each 2 drinks in and feeling the first effects of the alcohol. The sensation of excitement had not left Sarah. If anything, she felt more invigorated. She found herself gazing around, her eyes resting on various individuals. Keith even called her on it. "Babe, you look like you are enjoying the view," he pointed out, laughing. Sarah blushed. "I'm sorry, baby," she said. "I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm just feeling a bit restless." Keith laughed out loud. "Is that so? Hopefully we will find a way to deal with that later on tonight." A familiar figure made his way to the bar. Aaron smiled as he approached Sarah. "My friend Sarah," he called. "I see that your friend has not yet arrived." The brunette grinned and shook her head. "He's not due here until 9, she offered. Aaron arched his eyebrows, expressing relief. In that case, you will still have time for a dance or two, will you not?" Sarah glanced at Keith, who was smiling at her. "I suppose that one dance wouldn't hurt anything," she answered. "Excellent," Aaron exclaimed, holding out his hand. Sarah took it, and with a last glance at Keith, she moved onto the dance floor. Aaron was surprisingly nimble. It wasn't out of place to call him an excellent dancer. One dance became 2, then 3. While Aaron was completely respectful, Sarah found herself enjoying the connection. She wondered what it would be like to know him better, but quickly shook those thoughts away. After the 3rd dance, Sarah politely declined any more, fearing that she would become too exhausted to make a good impression on Mike upon his arrival. Aaron walked her back to Keith, then bought her another drink. "I thank you for the dancing, my beautiful friend," he offered. "If you find the time and desire to do so, I would be honored to dance with you again." With that, he nodded and made his way back out into the crowd. Keith smiled at his wife's return. "I was beginning to wonder if you were coming back," he teased. "Did you enjoy yourself?" Sarah laughed and took a sip from her drink. "He's a great dancer," she replied. "So yes, I had fun." The music was loud and it was tough to hear one another, so the couple mostly occupied themselves with drinking and people-watching, limiting their conversation to brief exchanges in between songs. 9 o'clock came and went, but Mike didn't show. A few minutes after 9, Keith typed out a text on his phone. "Running late?" he tapped out, then pressed send. It was at least 15 minutes later before a response arrived. As Keith read it, his expression visibly changed. "What's the matter?" Sarah asked. Keith turned the phone around for her to read. "Sorry, something came up. Won't be able to make it." That was the entirety of the text. "What the?" she expressed, frustration evident in her voice. "I thought he texted earlier saying he was looking forward to meeting, and now he's not coming at all, and can't bother to say so until he's way late?" "What a disappointment," Keith observed with a frown. "That really is frustrating. He should have communicated better." Sarah was upset. She had anticipated this night for days. and now it felt like they were left hanging. "So now what?" Sarah asked. "Do you want to settle up and leave? We can barely talk with the noise." Keith nodded. They could go home and work out their frustrations. He reached for his wallet with the intention of flagging down the bartender when his eyes settled on the tall man working his way back to their seats. He gestured with his head. "That, or you could go dance with your new friends some more. As I recall, dancing really gets you in a good mood," he added with a grin. Sarah followed her husband's nod to locate Aaron. Her eyes widened in response. "He's a good dancer," she offered. "But I think part of how I got in a good mood before was Ben dancing closely with me while I was drinking." Keith's grin only got bigger. "So dance closely with this guy and finish your drink before you go." Aaron had moved close to the couple. Sarah downed the rest of her drink in one gulp, making a tiny face in the process. She then leaned towards the man. "Would you like to dance again?" she asked. His face lit up with a wide, bright smile. "Of course, my beautiful friend," he replied happily. "Lead the way." Moments later, they had located a spot on the crowded floor and were dancing away. Sarah glanced back through the crowd to spot Keith, who raised his glass to her. She turned back to Aaron and immediately started dancing closer to him than she had been before. At first, he might have mistaken her proximity for congestion on the floor, but soon it was apparent that she was enjoying the closeness. With a wide grin, the man began matching her efforts. After the first dance ended, he leaned in and spoke in her ear. "What happened to your friend? It seems that you and your husband are still alone." Sarah replied, "He isn't going to make it. He didn't show up." Aaron shook his head. "That does not sound like a very good friend to me." Sarah ignored the comment and began dancing to the next song. She was clearly enjoying the interaction. The man seemed to be having a good time as well. Now that she was dancing with purpose and enjoying the rhythm, her excitement had begun to grow. His hands drifted to Sarah's hips. When she turned to dance away from him, she could feel the energy that surrounded them. They danced for 3 more songs, then eventually took a break to make their way back to the bar for another drink. Sarah was breathing heavily from the exertion, but Aaron didn't seem to be fazed in the slightest. "You are quite the dancer," she told him. "You don't seem to slow down at all." He smiled and nodded in reply. "Thank you for your kind words. Stamina is very important to me, so I work to keep myself in shape." Sarah was unsure if there was a deeper meaning in the tall man's statement. They rejoined Keith, and Aaron took the opportunity to grab an open table for the 3 of them. Sarah slid in beside her husband, while the muscular man sat opposite them. "So, Sarah tells me that your friend will not be joining you, and that he canceled without warning," Aaron said. Keith chuckled. "I don't know that I would call him our friend, per se. This was supposed to be our first in-person meeting," he explained. Sarah's eyes went wide, and she elbowed her husband. Aaron seemed unfazed, simply offering one of his bright smiles. If I may be so bold, I wondered if this was a different sort of friend. The lovely Sarah had mentioned that she was enjoying a drink to prepare for the evening and the fun activities planned. You, Keith, have not objected to her dancing with me, even when we dance quite close, yes? Even though I have danced several dances with her, yet you have not danced at all. Sarah blushed at the man's words, and Keith could feel his own face flush. He swallowed, then replied, "Yes, she was drinking to prepare to meet Mike. No, I have not objected to the dancing." Aaron nodded. "I see," he stated. He paused, appearing to debate something internally before speaking again. "Please forgive me, I do not wish to offend," he offered, "but I believe I understand what is happening here. The 2 of you had decided to meet another man tonight, am I correct?" Keith had expected this, but he still choked a bit on his drink. Sarah looked embarrassed, refusing to make eye contact with either of the men. Well, you see that. Keith fumbled, then he sighed. "Okay, yes," he admitted. "Sarah and I have begun to explore some fantasies, and, well, yes. We were meeting a guy tonight to go to his place and have a good time." Aaron gave another bright grin. "I see. And now he has failed to show up." Sarah straightened her back and managed to make eye contact with the man. "Perhaps we are all fortunate here tonight," he continued. "Perhaps I could fill in for this absent friend of yours." The tall man's tone was as mild as if he had suggested his preferred appetizer for dinner. Keith's head was spinning. This absolute stranger had just openly stated that he would like to spend time with Sarah. Keith struggled to put together a reasonable objection. Thank you for the offer, but we don't know you at all, and he said in an uneven tone. Aaron shook his head. Nonsense, he replied. Sarah has danced and spoken with me quite a bit tonight. If you had yet to meet this other friend, then surely he could not have been much more familiar to you than I am. He paused, then added a significant point. It is not as if my beautiful friend here is not drawn to me. She holds her body close to mine when we dance in a way that suggests a connection. Is this not true? Keith was taken aback, unsure of what to say. Sarah was looking directly at the tall man as he spoke. His words hung in the air for several awkward moments before the brunette finally spoke up in a small voice. It is true, she admitted, shifting in her seat. You are attractive. Aha! He exclaimed triumphantly. So what is the difficulty? The two of you wish to allow Sarah to enjoy another experience. Your intended partner did not show up. I am here. She is attracted to me and I to her. Fate has brought us together. Keith felt as if he had lost control. He looked at Sarah. Her expression showed clear interest. He tried a different approach to object. You're right that we might not have known Mike well, but we had already verified some safety matters with him. I just don't know. He trailed off. For a moment, the man seemed confused. Safety, he asked. Then, a light bulb seemed to go off and he chuckled. Ah, you mean health. Why did you not say so, my friend? Here. He pulled out a cell phone and began tapping away. I will log into my patient portal for you. I also believe in safety. I have recently had health tests administered and received my new results only yesterday. Yes, here you are. He passed the phone to Keith, and sure enough, there was a full battery of tests, with all normal results. The samples were collected 8 days ago, with results posted yesterday. They didn't get much more recent than that. After accepting the return of his phone, the tall man stood to his full height. I will avail myself to the use of the facilities now, he explained. I do not wish to apply pressure to you or your beautiful wife. This will give you time to discuss my offer. He closed with a smile. With that, he walked away, leaving the Fullers alone at the table. Keith glanced at Sarah. So, what do you think? He asked. Is this something you are interested in? It feels pretty forward of him to openly propose this. Sarah's gaze was a bit unfocused. It's a little wild, I admit, she stated. But he is right. We didn't really know Mike. He has the proper tests, so we can still really do everything we had planned to do, just with someone else. Keith couldn't help but smirk a little. We never really talked about you being with someone else, he observed. I suppose we can check off another first while we are at it? Sarah giggled. I guess so, she allowed. When the man returned to the table, he took one look at the Fuller's expressions and knew the answer. His own face broke into perhaps the largest grin yet. I can see what you think, my friends. I believe that it is time to go now. While Sarah had been intentionally putting the alcohol away, Keith had switched to soft drinks some time back, so he felt safe to drive. Aaron had assured them that he only lived a few minutes away, so the couple was once again following a new acquaintance to his home. Keith was surprised at how nervous he felt. After all, this had really been his idea from the beginning. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed calm-excited, perhaps. But if she felt nervous, her face didn't show it. Then again, Sarah was often that way. She might agonize over a decision, but once she made up her mind, she tended to stick with it. They followed Aaron's car into a residential neighborhood and soon pulled into a driveway in front of a clean, modest home. With one more look at one another, the couple got out of their car and followed the tall man into the house. The interior of the residence was fairly Spartan, though tasteful. However, it was clear that Aaron enjoyed incense. The cloying scent hung heavy in the air. Keith didn't know what to expect. He half expected Aaron to lead them directly into another room, but instead, he indicated seats on his couch while he took a chair across from them. May I offer you a beverage? Aaron asked politely. Sarah shook her head, and Keith followed suit. No thanks, I believe we are good, Keith replied. The three of them engaged in small talk, what everyone did for a living, how long they had lived in the area, hobbies they enjoyed. While Aaron was a charming enough host, the situation felt odd and artificial. Everyone knew why the couple had followed this man to his home. Why did they need to chit-chat about their jobs? After some time of awkward conversation that seemed to stretch on, Aaron pulled out a small box from beneath his coffee table. He then opened it and produced a baggie of plant matter, from which he withdrew a small amount and began to roll it in paper. "Do you mind if I partake?" he asked easily. Keith found himself feeling vaguely uncomfortable, but a glance at Sarah showed she had no such reaction, so he shrugged. "It's your house, so it's your business," he replied. Aaron grinned widely, finished rolling, and then lit the joint. He took a long pull, held in the smoke, and exhaled slowly. "Very nice," he observed. He held the joint out towards his guests. "Would you care to share?" Once again, Keith glanced at Sarah. It had been at least 10 years since either of them had used marijuana. It may have been longer. He fully expected Sarah to decline the offer, but to his surprise, she shrugged and reached out to accept it. She glanced at Keith with a wry grin as she raised the joint. Keith couldn't argue with Sarah's logic. After taking a small puff, Sarah coughed a bit, laughing at her reaction. "It's been a while," she admitted, trying again and managing better this time. Keith, deciding to follow her lead, took a turn as well. Although it had been years since he'd last tried something like this, the atmosphere felt laid back and lighthearted. They passed the joint around in relative silence, each feeling the effects as the moments passed. Keith soon felt a wave of calm wash over him, his body relaxing as his thoughts became more mellow. Sarah, sitting next to him, seemed equally relaxed, grinning to herself. He smiled, reflecting on how the evening had turned into something unexpectedly peaceful and contemplative. As the smoke drifted through the room, Sarah made an offhand comment that brought a round of laughter, lightening the mood even more. Their host, Aaron, joined in the conversation, and they all chatted with ease. The situation, though new and slightly surreal, carried a sense of openness and trust that made everyone feel at ease. It was clear the night had created a relaxed, friendly atmosphere where conversation flowed naturally and comfortably. The group continued to talk, sharing stories and moments of humor as they all enjoyed the easygoing environment they had created together. Aaron smiled gently and addressed Sarah and Keith in a calm tone. "I just want to ensure everyone is comfortable and clear about what we are doing here." Sarah nodded, acknowledging the discussion while remaining composed. The atmosphere remained thoughtful as they continued their conversation, reflecting on the boundaries they had set and the trust required for the evening. Keith observed closely, ensuring that everything unfolded in a respectful and consensual manner. The evening maintained a sense of ease as Aaron, Sarah, and Keith continued to navigate the situation with care and mutual understanding, ensuring that trust and communication remained central to the experience. Keith and Sarah exchanged a look, and Keith gently reassured her with a calm nod. They both knew that Sarah had gone through extensive testing and treatments in the past without success, and despite the uncertainties, they felt confident in their decisions. Aaron, observing the conversation, kept a respectful tone as they continued to discuss their choices. The evening had a surreal and reflective air, as each of them processed the moment with a sense of openness and understanding. Keith, feeling reassured by his wife's trust and confidence, leaned over and kissed her gently, allowing the tension in the room to ease further. As they shared this quiet, contemplative moment, the conversation remained respectful and light, keeping the evening focused on the mutual understanding that had brought them all together. The mood in the room continued to be one of trust and communication as they moved forward with their night in a way that felt comfortable and safe for everyone involved. Keith and Sarah exchanged a look as they navigated the intensity of the moment. Aaron, ever respectful, checked to ensure everyone was still comfortable with the evening's direction. Sarah, although quiet, nodded in agreement. They all moved with a sense of mutual understanding, making sure trust and respect remained at the center of their interaction. As the evening continued, there was a focus on maintaining open communication. The mood remained calm, and all involved made sure that boundaries were respected and that the situation was handled with care. For several moments, the room was filled with silence, the air tense as everyone processed the situation. Keith observed Sarah closely, seeing her uncertainty. Aaron maintained his respectful demeanor, ensuring that Sarah was comfortable and ready to proceed. The moment felt weighty as the participants continued to navigate the boundaries they had set. Aaron's calm voice broke the silence, reassuring Sarah that everything was okay. As they moved forward, the atmosphere was one of mutual understanding and communication. Each participant took care to respect the boundaries of the evening, ensuring that everyone involved was comfortable. The night continued with a focus on maintaining respect and trust as all parties moved through the experience with openness and care. The scene unfolded with a tension that seemed to fill the room. Sarah was clearly overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment, while Aaron remained composed, encouraging her to relax and let the experience unfold naturally. Keith observed everything with a mixture of emotions, struggling to process the gravity of the situation. Despite his unease, the room remained calm, and Aaron continued to guide Sarah through the experience with care and reassurance. As time passed, the atmosphere in the room shifted into one of quiet understanding. Each person involved moved forward with mutual respect and attentiveness, ensuring that everyone was comfortable and on the same page. Eventually, the situation came to a close, with all parties reflecting on the evening's events and maintaining a sense of trust and communication throughout the process. The atmosphere in the room was charged as Aaron moved with deliberate care, making sure everyone was comfortable. Sarah murmured softly, expressing a mix of emotions, while Aaron continued at a steady pace, ensuring everything was respectful and consensual. Keith watched the scene unfold, feeling a swirl of emotions as the situation progressed. Aaron's calm demeanor helped guide the evening, keeping things measured and thoughtful. The participants maintained clear communication throughout, allowing trust to be at the center of the experience. As the night carried on, the focus remained on mutual respect, with everyone involved ensuring they felt comfortable and secure. Eventually, the tension subsided, and the group shared a quiet moment of reflection, processing the events of the evening with an understanding that they had approached the situation with care and respect. As the moment built up, Aaron continued to speak softly to Sarah, ensuring that she was comfortable and aware of everything happening. Sarah responded, her expression showing a mix of emotions as she processed the situation, with both participants moving forward in a respectful and careful manner. Keith observed the scene, his mind racing as he took in what was unfolding before him. He felt a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, but remained rooted in place, watching everything happen. In the end, the situation concluded with mutual understanding and respect, each person having navigated the evening with care and consideration for one another's boundaries. The room quieted as everyone processed the weight of the experience, reflecting on the trust they had placed in each other. In the quiet aftermath of the night, Keith struggled to regain full awareness. The room was dimly lit, and he felt a strange disconnection from his surroundings, as though his body wasn't fully under his control. The faint sounds and motions near him took time to register, but his mind was clouded with exhaustion, making it hard to piece things together clearly. Lying in the crook of his arm was Sarah, her presence familiar and comforting. Keith attempted to focus, but his mind wandered, still lost in the haze of the evening. As the night stretched on, his thoughts eventually settled into a calm acceptance. His body relaxed, and he drifted in and out of sleep, reflecting on the complexity of the situation with a sense of quiet contemplation. The room, now filled with silence, remained peaceful as Keith rested, his thoughts gradually calming, leaving behind the events of the evening. The focus remained on the mutual understanding and connection shared between the participants, ensuring that trust and respect were upheld throughout the night. Keith was slowly pulled back to reality by the vibration of his phone. The room was quiet, with the soft breathing of Sarah and Aaron still asleep next to him. The dark curtains cast a dim glow over the room, creating a peaceful yet surreal atmosphere. Keith felt the weight of the previous night's events settle in his mind, but the details remained hazy, like fragments of a fading dream. As his mind cleared, he thought about the conversations and interactions that had taken place. It felt overwhelming, but there was an odd sense of calm within him. He decided not to dwell on the specifics, choosing instead to focus on the fact that they had all agreed to this moment. Keith's phone buzzed again, pulling him out of his thoughts. He took a deep breath, grateful for the silence now surrounding them, and tried to process everything that had happened in the most straightforward way possible. What mattered most to him was that Sarah was okay, and that they had navigated this experience together, each step taken with mutual trust. Keith woke up to the buzzing of his phone, the soft light filtering into the room. He felt disoriented, with vague memories of the night before swirling in his head. Sarah was still asleep next to him, and the room was quiet, aside from the faint sound of breathing. Keith tried to gather his thoughts, focusing on the present moment. The room had the unmistakable scent of the night's activities, but Keith pushed those thoughts away. He needed to focus on the present, and his phone buzzed again, demanding attention. He looked at Sarah, who seemed peaceful in her sleep. He pulled himself from the bed carefully, not wanting to disturb her, and checked his phone. It was an airline notification about a rescheduled flight. With a sigh, Keith stepped away, trying to clear his mind from the flood of overwhelming emotions and sensations. The important thing was that they had all agreed to this, and that Sarah seemed okay. He needed time to reflect and process everything that had transpired, but knew that for now, the best thing was to focus on moving forward together. New departure. 1:30 p.m. came the app notification. With dismay, Keith saw that the missed texts were from the administrative assistant at work. She had been trying to let him know that the flight had been changed. It was already nearly 11 a.m. He would have to hurry to get home, pack a bag, and rush to the airport to have any chance of making his flight. "Come on," Keith exclaimed. "We've got to go. My flight has been changed. I'm running very late." He and Sarah hurriedly got up, got dressed, and bid their host goodbye. Maddeningly, Keith could not reconnect with his wife before he left. It was all he could do to make his flight. They had a nice conversation over the phone that night while recounting their time at Aaron's house, but it wasn't quite the same. There was a lot to discuss. Sarah had indeed spent time with Aaron during the night. While it had led to some confusion, she reassured Keith that everything was consensual. She felt that by being open, she was not letting him down. They weren't sure if their earlier choices had been the best idea, but it had lowered their inhibitions and made things more adventurous. When Keith suggested that they should try this sort of openness again while sober, Sarah had giggled. "Maybe someday we will do that," she had replied. The business trip meant that Keith didn't have the chance to spend quality time with Sarah until late Wednesday evening. He did make up for lost time. They had an engaging night filled with conversation about their shared experiences. The one good thing about the delay was that it gave Sarah some time to recover. 2 weeks after they had spent the night with Aaron, Sarah experienced an unusually light period. She dealt with a few light cramps and some minor discomfort for a couple of days. 2 weeks later, both Keith and Sarah tested positive for COVID. Keith had the more common symptoms of cough, headache, and fatigue. Sarah experienced a bad headache along with some gastrointestinal symptoms instead of a cough or severe fatigue. For about a week, she would find herself feeling unwell at various times throughout the day, with some improvement in the afternoon, only to experience a return of symptoms the next day. Even so, she recovered from her illness faster than Keith did. He had a lingering cough for nearly a month, although she did seem to lack her usual energy for a few weeks as well. A month after being diagnosed with COVID, Sarah noticed that some of her clothes weren't fitting quite as well as they had been. She hadn't been able to maintain her workout routine regularly since getting sick. She decided that this weight gain was not something she wanted to continue. With that in mind, she committed to dedicating extra hours and effort to her workouts and started being more mindful of her caloric intake to regain control. 2 weeks later, Sarah returned home from a workout session and paused to examine her profile in the full-length mirror in their bathroom. "Keith, come here, please," she called. He stepped into the bathroom. "What's up?" he asked. Sarah took his hand and guided it over her abdomen. "Feel that?" she asked with a thoughtful expression. It's firm," he offered, uncertain of the implication. Sarah looked at him intently. "Yes, it is. It's also round. In fact, it's protruding. My abdomen has never looked like this before." Keith regarded her with a hint of confusion. "What are you saying?" he asked cautiously. She continued, undeterred. "Look at my skin. What do you notice?" He frowned slightly. Have you been outside? It looks a bit different. Your skin tone is more pronounced, too. He hesitated, glancing at her features. And they appear to be different, he added carefully. Do you know what this means? She asked, a spark of excitement in her eyes. A quick trip to the pharmacy and an at-home test confirmed it. The second line appeared much sooner than expected. There was no doubt about it. She was expecting a baby. Congratulations, Dr. Hampton told the happy couple as he reviewed Sarah's chart. You are definitely expecting, no doubt about it. When Sarah had called, the doctor had adjusted his schedule to see them in less than a week. He seemed almost as excited about the news as Sarah and Keith were. The doctor had several black and white images arranged on his desk, but for now, they were focused on the images displayed on a monitor, surrounded by various annotations. We conducted extensive testing and measurements, considering your challenges with conception, Hampton explained. The news is excellent. Everything appears to be perfectly normal. There are no signs of any potential issues on your ultrasounds. The fetus is developing as expected and is positioned well within your uterus. Would you like to know the baby's sex? He asked. The Fullers exchanged quick glances before Sarah nodded. Yes, please, the doctor smiled. It's a boy without a doubt, he grinned. Congratulations again. So, when is the due date? Sarah asked, her face beaming with unbridled joy. Dr. Hampton continued to smile. Well, I know that it's tough to say for certain since your cycles are quite irregular, but the measurements put you at exactly 13 weeks along, so that would make the due date around September 19th. Sarah frowned. But doctor, she protested, I told you that my last cycle was 9 weeks ago. I can't possibly be more than 9 weeks along. Hampton chuckled gently. Sarah, that is quite unlikely given your baby's measurements. We wouldn't be able to determine the sex so easily at 9 weeks either. Probably not at all. I suspect that what you thought was your period was likely implantation bleeding. As you mentioned, it was very light. That suggests that you conceived a couple of weeks before that, which aligns perfectly with the baby's growth. I would confidently say that you are 13 weeks along, give or take a few days. A cold jolt ran through Sarah's body. 2 weeks before what she had thought was her period had been the night with Aaron. Frantically, she ran through her memories. She and Keith had been together often. Surely it couldn't be. But no. They had chosen to pause their intimacy for the 2 nights before meeting Aaron and had been apart for the 3 nights following. Sarah recalled feeling particularly aware of her body then. She must have been in a fertile phase that weekend. Keith hadn't been with her at Aaron's place, and then he had to leave town for a few days immediately after they returned. If she was 13 weeks along, then the baby couldn't have been Keith's. The baby had to be from a different father. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.